Sasuke throughout the Kage Summit is forced to face the most powerful foes on the entire planet, being the 5 Kage. However, at the end, he finally hunts down Danzo Shimura, the replacement as the 6th Hokage. However, what would happen if the Akatsuki members were to replace Danzo on this bridge, and this Sasuke, who seems almost comparable to the Akatsuki, would actually have to fight them instead? So yeah, today I'm also joined by Thunder God, as you can tell by the title. So you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, lay out some structure, and hop into that first section real quick?
Yeah, what's going on, guys? TG, or Thunder God here, getting ready to ruin that beautifully scripted intro that Virtue did for us. And he kind of introduced it. We're essentially going to be taking Sasuke against the when he fights Danzo on the bridge, and be pitting him up against the Akatsuki members. Now, for the structure of this video, we're going to be kind of doing the duos for some of the mid-tier of the Akatsuki. So Sasuke will take on Hidan and Kakuzu, and the likes of Sasori and Deidara as pairs, as obviously... I mean, I'm going to be pretty real. We don't really need to see those individual matchups. I feel like that's kind of wasting people's time. Yeah. There's a different tier of character. And then for the more maybe contentious ones like Kisame, Itachi, Pain, Obito, and Konan, we're going to do those as individual matchups. So just to make the video a bit more interesting. Now, Sasuke's performance in the summit is really solid. I feel like a lot of people downplay it, just not being aware or really gauging the power increases that Sasuke had. And even though he does get stronger via having his Mangekyo Sharingan, it's mainly the hatred increases that are amping Sasuke throughout the summit. As a baseline, we know his chakra and, coldness of his chakra is directly compared to Curse Mark Stage 2. Now, I will say, Sasuke's chakra being cold is generally a direct indicator of his strength via Kerin. So, I do think it is fair to say, at least like base Sharingan, Sasuke, and CM2 are comparable stat-wise. Yeah. I'd probably lean towards Kage Summit Sasuke as a whole, as I do think he also just has a better arsenal even with his base Sharingan, but to each his own. Obviously, Sasuke would go on to gain numerous hatred amps throughout the summit and actually use his Mangekyo more, which is something Obito notes during the summit. He wanted Sasuke to get acclimated more with his eyes and just get better with his dojutsu. We then go to the Danzo fight after he heals a certain amount of time with Kerin and gets a bit more practice in, where he does acclimate a bit more in that fight, and his Susanoo fully evolves into the version that can shoot arrows, or like the armored up version. Not the fully armored up version, but he does have a complete form with clothing or just wrapping around it. So Sasuke is just improves overall during the summit, and you can't really cap him as earlier performances, as he's shooting up entire tiers. Like, he goes from the Raikage breaking through the rib cage to just bodying everybody in the room due to the partial skeletal Susanoo that can just rip apart the pillars and survive all of the attacks thrown at him and react to all those attacks. So it's a pretty insane tier difference. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, even then, I was going to interject there and say that one thing you could say for how much he actually grows, and Karin's notes about Sasuke's growth and why it actually is more power correlated, despite it being called, well, it's a thicker chakra or a colder chakra rather than a potent chakra. And that's actually because Toby Ramen asked to, describe the Sharingan by Sasuke. He kind of just gives a good description. He basically says that the deeper the darkness gets, the greater the ocular powers become. So this darkness is where Sasuke is actually falling back into, and this is why every time Sasuke gets an amp, whether it be whenever his Susanoo evolves or something along those lines, Karin notes it, except whenever he gains some traditional more chakra, things like that, just like an actual healing, she notes that he is being rejuvenated whenever Zetsu does it. So these are power amps, that's why they go up every single time. So that's just an interesting note to say why they are, or at least his chakra is getting more powerful, not that he's actually getting more chakra, but a more potent chakra is something noted by Fukasaku to boost ninjutsu, taijutsu, and genjutsu, which is really important as well. So basically he's just growing exponentially, as you mentioned, to the point where that other Sasuke, whenever he's much weaker, is able to put up Enton Kagetsuchi during the Raikage's elbow, like his his bolt,
lateral bolt of pain.
Yeah, I don't know why I fucking spaced that. So his lateral bolt of pain, and so the Enton can come up completely, and so imagine that Sasuke, but with 3 more exponential amps, one that's so large that Karin can barely even recognize Sasuke once he hits the V3 Susanoo. So yeah, Sasuke has obviously grown quite a bit through the summit, and he should be above most of the 5 Kage, at least in these one-on-one matches during the summit at that time, which is really telling for how he's going to enter these matches.
Yeah, but I would say, I agree with you. I think by the time of the Danzo fight, Sasuke could just, at least at that point during time, beat any of the 5 Kage pretty indisputably 1v1. I don't think that's too questionable.
Yep, and for those who would be concerned about the Oniki case, what I would just say is that he likely is more amped up in the war, something kind of implied by Deidara when he notes that Oniki is faster than he was in his prime. So, yeah, I would definitely say that Sasuke, he is almost standing at the top of the shinobi world alongside these other S-rank criminals, if not being above them. But I guess we could start off with our first one being, you know, Hidan and Kakuzu, the greatest, my favorite personal duo within the Akatsuki. And, you know, while Hidan absolutely sucks and belongs in the dumpster in the alleyway of New York alongside some big rats, Kakuzu is actually quite cool. Kakuzu is actually quite cool. I really do like Kakuzu. I'm kind of a Kakuzu apologist. You know, I got a Kakuzu versus Pain video, so I really do like Kakuzu. I think his showings against Kakashi are maybe more impressive than what some people like to give him. I don't think he's the weakest in the Akatsuki, sitting just in front of his garbage, sitting next to the rat dumpster friend Hidan. I think he is actually quite potent, especially when considering things like his ninjutsu, such as his lightning hearts and things like that, which are able to equal out 2 Raikiri. Although something to note is Kakashi can still react. And this is a problem here with Kakashi being able to react almost every single time, and the only times he really does get caught is whenever he's having to protect Team 10. But do you want to go ahead and touch on this and what it might mean for how he's going to stack up to Sasuke alongside his...
Yeah, I think the problem is, right, is that you kind of have a benchmark with beginning of Shippuden Sasuke and Kakashi. Now, if you want to say Kakashi is stronger than beginning of Shippuden Sasuke, and Naruto is as well, because, you know, it's more of a narrative implication, or you don't really think it's that solid, I think that's fine. I think they should just be comparable to one another, or the fact that Sasuke is still in the conversation kind of does paint that he's in a similar tier. We know that 6 months roll past that initial assessment from Sasuke to heavy Sasuke, who then absorbs Orochimaru. So he clearly can't be like held at the same level that he was previously, right? So you would just infer, okay, he's a decent bit stronger. Even if you didn't want to quantify it, it is enough to feel as if he could betray Orochimaru and actually go on and fight Itachi compared to beginning of Shippuden, where he just says blatantly, yeah, me and Orochimaru can't defeat Itachi. So there has to have been enough of a difference for Sasuke to feel confident enough to actually leave Orochimaru or just not give him over his body. So you then go on to the 5 Kage Summit, where even his base Sharingan just kind of cliffs that version. I'm actually of the opinion that base Sharingan Sasuke in the 5 Kage Summit is almost like a power cliff, like a mark you can use for a lot of other characters in the series, and most people actually don't scale to that Sasuke. He's kind of ridiculously strong, which sets up a really bad scenario for his stats, since the version against Danzo would be almost a couple of tiers above that. And then you obviously have his Mangekyo techniques or speed amplifying techniques like the Chidori, or just general ninjutsu like fire style. Like Sasuke Chidori would be able to cancel out like false darkness. That really wouldn't be a problem. You could say his fire style may be able to cancel out the fire heart. Even if they combine, I don't really see a reason Sasuke couldn't just block it with his Susanoo, even the base ribcage, or just dodge it in a similar manner to Kakashi. So he kind of comes in solid, and the hearts themselves are kind of questionable durability wise. Choji cracks the lightning heart. I know a lot of people don't bring this up, but he is actually the one to crack it, because Kakuzu's hearts can still form while they're damaged. You see the water heart is still able to keep form even when Kakashi shoots a Raikiri through it, whereas the lightning heart is what Kakuzu returns to himself already damaged and just kind of substitutes for the heart that Shikamaru had taken out via Hidan. So they actually don't have that high of ceilings in terms of durability, at least in my opinion. So I don't really see an issue, and I think the hearts fall relatively quickly. And the minute Sasuke enters the Susanoo, I don't really think there's any hope for Hidan and Kakuzu. Obviously, Hidan isn't really going to be tagging Sasuke. His best feats are kind of just taking Asuma's or grazing Asuma in an uncontested 1v1. Not really that great of a feat compared to this version of Sasuke. Do you want to chime in?
Yeah, for sure. So, like, one thing you can even note is, like, to say that, well, so if this 3-Tomoe Sasuke is able to run and react relatively to the V1 Raikage and even be stated to be above his Curse Mark 2 variant whilst in Hebi, that's actually something really weird, because that Sasuke actually does get Deidara, the strongest of the bottom members of the Akatsuki, which each get assigned to Team 7. So, you know, this is something to note. This Sasuke is also someone who has, like noted in the third data book, to have the potential to even surpass the Akatsuki and things along those lines. He takes the breath away from the Akatsuki members with his speed and stuff like that. And these sorts of Akatsuki members is kind of a general reference to these bottom 3 which have been introduced, or I guess it'd be bottom, you know, these bottom 4, I guess, or whatever. So it'd be in reference to those. And then so Sasuke, whenever he fights the Raikage, he then gets much stronger after opening just the MS, such as how whenever Sasuke gets slammed, completely on his back and the Raikage goes down to chop him, he's able to open the MS up and then use a Susanoo hand to completely outspeed the Raikage and reposition himself to have a better advantage, at least in speed wise. So that's a good way you can have a measure of comparison, as TG was implying, you know, with how much greater this MS Sasuke really would be than this Kakuzu tier, this Hidan tier. Kakuzu is obviously greater than Hidan. Hidan states that Kakuzu is the doer in Jinchuriki capture, which is their primary objective almost always. So yeah, I think it is pretty clear here that Sasuke is going to definitely beat these two up at the same time. It doesn't really matter. If you were to say, well, maybe Hidan could get some blood or something like that, I don't see how you'd ever argue his speed is even great enough. His best feat would be maybe parrying off a Kakashi on the back foot who's more worried about Kakuzu, although that doesn't do much. You know, maybe if you really want to take the charity, maybe just say that like Sasuke uses MS and then Hidan's able to get the blood from the eye or something stupid like that.
Yeah. So it like licks the ground or just hey, let me get some rat behavior, you know? But I agree with you. I think the fact that Kakashi is able to combat the two, even for a short duration by himself, does speak volumes about what this Sasuke can do, honestly speaking. And we've seen how his upper stages of Susanoo even just tank a 4v1 with Dauri, Tamari, Gaara, and Kankura. So I think it's just pretty clear that he'd be able to dominate pretty handily.
Absolutely. Yeah, and after that, though, I will say, even though I've never been a super big guy to compare this jump, I really do think Sasori and Deidara do have a much better chance against Sasuke than Hidan and Kakuzu do. Now, I know you are a avid Sasori fan. He's probably your favorite member in the entire Akatsuki. Okay, nobody likes him. I play. So, you know, for Sasori, he has some interesting ends, and, you know, everybody has heard it. You touched on this before. I've touched on this. Everybody has heard it. He scales to the third kage, who is greater than Rasa, who's relative to War Art Gaara, and who's greater than 5 Kage Summit Gaara, who can outspeed the Raikage. You guys have heard this awful train of thought up by somebody who probably shouldn't be power scaling anymore. But do you want to go ahead and touch on this train about the third Kage and if he really can scale to like a V2 Raikage that did combat Sasuke?
Well, I think the idea is, right, and this is the best way I say it. Let's say I give Sasori the best interpretation, right? And let's say you use Gaara as a benchmark. The best case you could make is that he scales to a V2 Raikage not using body flicker, which Sasuke would just be... Sasuke's already kind of approaching that anyway with his mental reactions in Kagetsuchi, since the minute the Raikage is not using body flicker, he's able to perceive the Raikage, or when the Raikage is using guillotine drop. The reason this almost wouldn't matter is because Sasuke would just cliff that entirely in his Danzo fight. And the problem with Sasori in this situation is I'm not of the opinion that he would actually have enough AP, even if you go with like his Iron Sand, which is his hardest hitting move, at least in terms of AP, would actually be able to breach the Susanoo. That's pretty much where he cliffs off, in my opinion. Or his basic puppets really wouldn't present too much of an issue. I think it's too much of an issue to just suggest like Sasori would be able to do anything. If I don't want to really go into the poison route, since that's kind of predicated on him even tagging Sasuke in the first place. And I think once he enters the Susanoo, that just dies to 0. So I think the AP point is a bit more important, at least in this case. So I think all you really have to argue for Sasuke over Sasori is that he just initiates the ribcage, and Sasori wouldn't have the general AP feats to really breach it outright. Or, you know, by extension, if you did want to scale him to the other Kazekage, it's also dubious if they have the AP feats as well to kind of paint it. So that's what I'd say about Sasori. I think individually, like, he does do a bit better than Kakuzu or Hidan, but, you know, 100 puppets doesn't do too much for him, since, like, even though they are able to react quicker, again, they lack those hard-hitting moves and are just using basic ninja tools. You know, nothing too insane. So that's probably what I would say on the Sasori end.
Yeah. Another way people would also use to kind of justify him being much stronger than what he appears to be whenever Sakura's low-key giving him the hands would be to say that, well, Chiyo actually is relative to Hanzo's above all 3 Sanin. Yeah, this is not very smart. But obviously, what's interesting about this, to make this note, is the only time we really get a she ever fought Hanzo is almost always implied to be she fought Hanzo's platoon. using her medical ninja skills to also just combat Hanzo's poison using the antidote and things along those lines. Not that she actually was up there decking Hanzo with a left hook or anything like that. So I would say that even if you do take this Chiyo route, I just don't think there's really much to it. Sasuke by this point is narratively somebody who should scale above Orochimaru, at least in my opinion. Now the reason why I would say this is because both Sasuke and Naruto get what the Volume 45 back cover calls ever increasing powers, which is interesting as it both calls both Sage Mode and the MS ever increasing, despite the fact that Sage Mode is an upfront much greater amp than the MS. And the reason is because, well, Sasuke kind of has to acclimate to it. Naruto just gets it straight up. He gets the straight up power, and then he has to acclimate after on how he's gonna use that power, manipulate that power, and things along those lines. So what's interesting about this is, well, that's true. Naruto is greater up front. This could even be implied by Zetsu when he states that he thinks Naruto is even stronger than Sasuke. The problem is Sasuke, his growth in adapting to the MS is through the summit. So this is why at the end of the summit, both of their ever-increasing powers have evolved to their maximum output, and they both admit that they would die if they would fight. This is something Hagoromo could also be used to kind of substantiate this idea because, well, he gives both of them six pass chakra and ways to manipulate that chakra. Naruto in the form of Sage Mode, Sasuke in the form of an ocular progression. So you could use this to sort of justify these amps being relative in at least some degree, and Naruto and Sasuke being relative to some degree, which is very consistent with how they're kind of trying to reach the level of the Akatsuki enemy, one with the Rinnegan, one with the Sharingan, that actually beat up their Sannin mentors and their higher forms. Pain beat up Sage Jiraiya, Itachi beat up Hydra Orochimaru, and then later you brought this up in the war arc, they have to fight a character in Obito who has the Rinnegan and Sharingan. So this is an interesting note to say that they are really on this very similar narrative tier, and at least Sasuke in this narrative is certainly above Orochimaru, which is consistent anyway. Orochimaru's best feat would be saying, maybe the third anime profile guys say that he has practically the same taijutsu as Hiruzen, and Hiruzen can stay at the top of the world, and we've already discussed how Sasuke already is standing at the top of the world, so this Sannin level doesn't really matter, and this Sannin tier almost eclipses all these lower Akatsuki members anyway, which can be used for more supplementary support in that last section as well. And past that though, I really do notice how Sakura can almost react to Sasori in every single instance we really get, which is weird because she can at least perceive him and all of these things whenever, a heavy Sasuke was able to blitz her and things like this. So it is just a really bad look to say, okay, Sasuke gets multiple exponential amps throughout the summit, but not even that. He also gets the MS and that progression, and he gets Orochimaru absorbed after that point, more heavy Sasuke training, things along those lines. So there is a lot to say that this Sasuke has to be definitely faster than this Sasori. But do you want to go ahead and enter us into Deidara and how he might stack up, or finish some thoughts on Sasori?
Yeah, well, I agree. I think, Sasuke just eclipsing the Sannin tier does just put him above a good chunk of the Akatsuki, which is really all you need to say to a certain extent, but we obviously touched on a bunch of things. So him just being above that Sannin level is all you really need to say. Talking about Deidara, I will say, I think it's a lot of the same notions. We were talking about this before we got into the recording, but I kind of have some problems with how people perceive Deidara versus Sasori, Deidara versus Sasuke, in that a lot of people paint the fight like heavy Sasuke is like massively faster than Deidara, when that's not really the case. They mainly base it off of Sasuke using body flicker, which is really just short-term speed boost to get to your opponent. The minute you're not using body flicker, your speed isn't really amped anymore, which is evident as Sasuke literally swings and Deidara can react to him. So, and if you want another example, like you look at the Raikage versus Sasuke, where he body flickers to Sasuke, but when he goes to attack, he's no longer in body flicker. So it's really just used to get you to your opponent quicker, and then when you're not using it anymore, that's when you attack. That's kind of the whole deal with it. And we see Deidara is promptly able to react to this, and also able to react to higher stages of Sasuke, that being Curse Mark Stage 2 throughout the fight. So I will say people paint Deidara like Sasuke was washing him during that encounter, but I actually don't. I think it's kind of similar to Gaara, where even if there was a speed gap, it's not so severe to where Deidara is like not able to react or not able to combat Sasuke. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I got to preach this Deidara apologetic for a while, because people always still want to hate on him, and even if you do want to take that initial assumption to say that, well, Sasuke does open the fight with body flicker, although he does cover a much greater speed than in the time frame that Deidara actually has to react. So therefore, if the distance was closed, just a little shorter, then maybe Deidara would have been blitzed. Now, my problem with that, though, is it has another problem at the end, because then you have to also grant Deidara something, which is that by the time Sasuke enters into his combat speed and begins to swing, Deidara jumps and covers a much greater distance. So, yeah, then he's focused more on Toby and if he should detonate these bombs before Sasuke gets behind him, and then you'll notice that he blows up the C1 in his own face while reacting to Sasuke, albeit slightly due to him being probably off guard. But he does come out with this blade, this slice across his left shoulder. But what's interesting about this left slice is it actually goes too far down the front side of his shoulder for there not to be excess combat speed, reaction, relativity, and movement in the time frame we didn't get to see, because obviously Sasuke's blade can't cover that angularity, I guess. So that's just an interesting point. And then, as TG highlighted, which I have also before previously, that Sasuke very well does react to curse marks, or not Sasuke, sorry, Deidara does react to curse mark Sasuke throughout this fight, such as the Chidori charge, and whenever he gets pinned, they react relatively to get out of the flying bird or the dragon that's falling. So obviously we do have this Deidara who's probably relative, maybe above just by a little bit if you want to grant us some charity, this, curse mark to Sasuke. But again, as you guys, if you were paying attention, you note that, well, that's great, but, initial Kage Summit Sasuke is already above that, which is really bad, because now Sasuke is not only still Sasuke, it's going to make Deidara fight out of character and things along these lines due to his Sharingan, such as how Deidara completely skips over C3 and goes straight to C4, or how Deidara wants to go for an encapsulated C4 rather than just putting detonating clay inside of his hidden clay clone jutsu that does trap Sasuke, which probably would have won him the fight. But no, he decides he wants to go flashy, use his newest, best technique in the C4. So he's obviously going to be out of character here as well, which could lead him into Sasuke now stunning him with stronger genjutsu than before. One that actually will probably just override Deidara's eye no matter what. Do you want to go ahead and highlight how bad this could be?
Yeah, so the whole deal is that 5 Kage Summit Sasuke's Genjutsu is actually superior to his heavy version. It's noted in the data book that he essentially reaches the peak of the Sharingan's hypnotism. So you could even say that his Sharingan is now still peaking out due to his MS being unlocked, and he's almost entering a new tier of what he can do regularly, since we kind of know from Heavy Sasuke that he kind of mastered his Sharingan to the max. And then the MS almost kind of like, it's almost like a breakthrough that allows him to kind of go a little further with his base Sharingan. So he does actually, or you could just say he still didn't master his Sharingan to like 100%, and the hatred increases or MS allowed him to do so. Both interpretations are fine, but he does just have a stronger variant that allows him to completely control somebody's body or take away their bodily movement. So we see when Deidara is falling, he attempts to break through a genjutsu from Sasuke, that being when his pupil, it doesn't dilate, it just kind of shrinks, and this is like his counter genjutsu mechanism. And he does this when Sasuke is like charging at him in the air, but when they both fall, we actually said Deidara did get caught in genjutsu, even though he performed his like anti-genjutsu mechanism. So Sasuke could have potentially done a stronger variation of genjutsu, or just been using earlier to assert or like figure out that Deidara actually could be caught in genjutsu, kind of similar to Danzo. It doesn't really matter. All that really matters is that genjutsu is effective on Deidara, and it's more questionable. It's more questionable if he'd be able to break out of it. Even if you didn't go down that route, it's very unlikely that Deidara's explosives have enough firepower to actually breach the Susanoo, at least at this stage. And this doesn't really work on a battlefield with Sasori because the puppets themselves are a bit lower on the durability end. So even like large scale explosions aren't really that good in the case of this fight, because they may actually, have an adverse effect and blow up Sasori himself. So kind of looking at that, it's a bit of a tough situation for the duo. They almost don't have the firepower to break through the Susanoo. And friendly fire is a real thing, along with Sasuke's hacks like Amaterasu or Genjutsu they could potentially use while in the Susanoo. It's really a bad look.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Sasuke even has techniques that are faster than himself, which is something that's going to even heighten that speed gap. He can use things like the Inton Kagetsuchi, and his, Susanoo arrows and things like that are just really nasty to just widen that speed gap, such as how you can see against Danzo, or as we mentioned earlier, whenever A is able to outspeed Sasuke in his V2 cloak, except Sasuke is still able to like turn his head and perceive him and light up the Inton and things along those lines, which will allow him to defend himself against characters that are faster than himself. But the problem here, neither Sasori nor Deidara are faster than this Sasuke initially, so it just kind of widens that speed gap. He also has a better advantage than Heavy Sasuke did, because while you may say, well, Heavy Sasuke can fly, well, yeah, but this Sasuke also just has a sniper rifle that's much faster than himself, so he could just use the Susanoo arrow to maybe snipe him out of the air or something like that. He also has an Enton ball on his Susanoo, which he can also use in Ribcage, which he uses, and the weird thing is, so it's this ball that attaches to the back of his Susanoo. Now, what's interesting is he's able to fire out these like wisps, like of Enton outwards, and he's able to fire out 3, I believe. Yeah, in the EMS, he fires out 5, and you could see that same ball, but now it's in the hand, so it's almost as if this regular MS Sasuke is just a toned down version of EMS Sasuke in this ability, so he can at least still fire these out towards Deidara and things along those lines, which again are just really nasty, because one thing you could even say is that, well, they're like relative to like Garcant, which is relative to like Darwee's faster attacks, than they're, at least in comparison to himself. He's able to combo alongside V1A, who's relative to the Sasuke, who we already mentioned is greater than that Deidara anyway, so you could already say that these are just faster than the Heavy Sasuke that was combating Deidara anyway. So he definitely just has good ways to get around Deidara, good ways to get around Sasori. So I guess now we can move on to Konan really quick, and I almost hate Konan as much as I do Sasori. I'm kidding, I really don't hate any of the Akatsuki members. It's just some I don't quite get the appeal to, and because Konan is one of those cases that has a lot of those high-end scaling, but none of her scaling at all really works. Do you want to go ahead and touch on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think my main problem with Konan is that, like, she has a really good prep feat, but her baselines are just very arbitrary. I think if you're generous in that she vaguely scales to the base Sonin, and that is being a bit generous, maybe you could say Jiraiya just happened to counter her, or, that was the one jutsu that she wouldn't have been able to dissolve through. Okay, that's fine, but her higher end showings are a lot more contentious in that, yeah, she has this prep feat on Obito, who's also just underestimating her, and she had complete knowledge of his abilities, so obviously it's not indicative to a 1v1 encounter if they saw each other on the street. So it's really hard to just give her a solid placement. I will say, if you go off the idea of just her explosives or something that she carries manually, it does have a good precedent for who she could damage in the verse. So that's probably something I would give her, and I think she could be threatening to a lot of the mid to lower tier Akatsuki members. Off that logic and the idea that she does dissolve through a lot of attacks in character, I think that could make her formidable. So I would just say, like, this potential base Sonin threat, great AP, dissolves through jutsu, Sharingan countermeasures. That's what I would probably say about Konan.
Yeah, and even then, to supplement what you said, I think you really did cover that well. Is like her really best feat that's even almost unquantifiable still is whenever Jiraiya tries to use his fire style flame bombs on the paper clones or whatever. Whenever she like comes out to try to stab that one goon with her like paper rod, and he uses the jutsu, where then she's able to kind of reappear at a further back distance and things like that. So yeah, it is really just like, at best you say, well, maybe she's base Sonin level or whatever, but again, as we discussed with Orochimaru, who's likely a superior to this Jiraiya, Sasuke is sort of eclipsing that tier anyway. So yeah, for Konan, there's not much for us to say. Obviously, paper and fire don't mix, and then Sasuke has the Enton, which is a mimic of the Amaterasu, which Sasuke also has. So obviously Sasuke does have a really bad stylistic counter to Konan, so I'd say that this Sasuke should beat Konan pretty fairly. But Kisame is a different case. Kisame, he's kind of a different monster. He is the tailless-tailed beast after all. He is, as the chapter synopsis statement notes, the Akatsuki's monster. So that's something I think is quite telling, because the only problem, though, is here we actually have him fighting an opponent at the direct time that Sasuke is fighting, and that's obviously against Killer B. Now, me and TG are both in agreement that B grows tremendously whenever he's fighting. So, and just throughout the series in general. So, like, whenever we get his character introduction against Sasuke, he opens it up with him basically training in the cave. He's even using, like, a transformation of Yuki. He comes out. He obviously hasn't seen the sun in a while. So, the implication there is he's at least been training for a bit. So, it's very consistent for him to be training. The Raikage also trains as well, as noted in the 4th data book and done, maybe chapter 416, I believe off my head. So, obviously, the Raikage trains. B has to acclimate to his level, or at least attempt to, so he has to train as well. But the problem is the only measure of comparison then for B is not to the War Arc B, but in fact it's actually just, well, it's the 4th data book that notes that A is always the strongest in the village, meaning he's stronger than B at this time. And we do have a measurement for A at this time, which is just probably under the Sasuke we're taking for comparison. But I guess if you want to give him some benefit, maybe you can discuss the relativity between B and Kisame. But do you want to go ahead and discuss why V2B probably isn't that much relative to Kisame, and he's probably more comparable to like V1 or
the thing is, like, V1B, he fights. So the thing is, what you have to understand about B is that he has a very unorthodox fighting style, and this is partially to compensate for the fact that when he powers up into his, uses Jinchuriki powers or just gains Bijou chakra, he gets a lot more linear. The thing with V2 is that even though it fires out a linear lariat, it's just fast enough to where even though Kisame like can kind of throw his foot up to like kind of circumvent the force, he still does just get tagged and tore through with Samehada blocking the attack and shaving off chakra. So it kind of implies like this is an upper limit for base Kisame to really deal with. And again, this creates kind of a problem because the way it's presented, at least this point in the series, Raikage is above B. Like, Karin definitely like notes the difference or notes the similarities, as the Raikage has similar chakra volumes to B. Like you mentioned, his narratives. And I do think B's narratives do change and he does get stronger. And if you're really going to question if B gets stronger, I'm going to paint a scenario for you. He goes from in full Gyuki being compared to the Raikage to late war performing the same feats as KCM2 Naruto. Like, it doesn't, there's at a level you just have to understand B's always improving, and maybe it's kind of the Kakashi syndrome, where maybe you could say it's just like he kind of has to maintain relevant. But I do think he is relevant in every fight he's in, and he just keeps improving with the rest of the cast, and there are reasons for that. But it is the case. So looking at that, it doesn't really put Kisame in a great light, since Sasuke already kind of battles this B caliber opponent. And especially when you look at some of Sasuke's techniques and speed at this point, like, I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be super blatant. I think Kisame might be an Amaterasu victim. And I know that sounds bad, but you got to understand that this is quite possibly the worst technique that could be ever used against Kisame and Samehada. You want to talk about this?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I really do think it is. I think it's just that, so my problem is, well, Sasuke probably comes into this fight with a speed advantage, which is just, again, really easy to capitalize on when he has these faster than himself techniques, especially ones that could be fired out at distance to prevent maybe a chakra suction or things along these lines. It's also likely just going to go straight through Samehada. Samehada's potency and durability just don't really have that good of showings. Example, like Jiraiya's Toad Gamma, you guys probably don't even recognize that off the name, is able to block his like strike and things along these lines. It's really just not that crazy. And so I think it's basically just a case that like maybe even Sasuke could be aided by some summons. He summons his Hawk in the fight against Danzo. Maybe that's something that can come out here as well. So the only way I really would ever see Kisame winning this match would be if he were to fuse. I actually think it's a good match, but the problem is maybe you could even say like the Enton or the Amaterasu, if it were to actually just target the water, then it might be able to evaporate it or something along those lines. And that's presuming he doesn't just attach it to Kisame and completely incinerate him. But if he were to get stuck in the bubble with no help, maybe you can make a good case for Kisame to say, well, he's able to completely beat around or outspeed V2B. He's able to use those bones that come out of him to pierce through both of the cloaks to absorb the chakra. So yeah, he's obviously a really nasty character, absolute monster. But the problem is, again, it's just a really bad stylistic matchup, especially when you do consider that Kisame was amped off B's chakra very significantly when he does perform those feats anyway, and that B in V2 would already be under the V2 Raikage that Sasuke was able to react to prior to getting 2 more exponential amps on top of the one that we'll be taking here. So Sasuke, he has a lot of other techniques as well that could even be used to help stall out Kisame, maybe some fireball jutsus, things along those lines. I really just could see a lot of things for Sasuke to do to make this not so much of an easy fight for Kisame, and for him to definitely come out with the win. Do you have anything else to add there?
Nah, I mean, the way I'll honestly say, actually, I shouldn't say this, for the rest of the video, but I do agree. I'll say this. Nah, I pretty much agree with everything you said. Okay. I was gonna say, like, I have him like fucking below the top 3, but I'm like, we're about to talk about that. Why would I fucking do that? But go ahead, bro. Yeah.
No, you're good. No, so yeah, next up we have Itachi, Pain, and Obito. Now, these 3 can almost be encapsulated a little bit in a similar tier. And while, you know, sometimes people like to argue about the minutiae of them being different, I think most people should at least try to come to the conclusion that they are all portrayed as somewhat relative. One is not in a much larger tier than the other, and I have the Obito hype beast sitting next to me right now while we're recording this, and he's giving me the authority to say this.
Yeah, so I do agree with that. Like, I'm of the opinion, because, you know, you can maintain whichever order you want, but the fact of the matter is, like, these characters are threatening to one another. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't think, I think the top 3, while I do have my opinions, they can be interchangeable. And to say, like, one isn't threatening to each other, especially when you get into the minutia of their abilities and stuff like that and their relationships, it's really weird to me. You know what I'm saying? I've never claimed otherwise, but a lot of people do, and I also I think that's a bit ridiculous as well, to just say, like, Obito stomps, like, Pain and Itachi at the same time, which is just insane to me. But yeah, continue.
No, I mean, yeah, it's just, but, you know, some people, they talk about, you know, you being an Obito guy, and it's like, well, even then, I think most people should genuinely agree that Obito's not going to blitz around Itachi. Itachi's not going to blitz around Pain. Pain's not going to blitz around Obito. I don't think that's an actual honest take. So the way that I actually like to go about this is to say, well, the 4th data book makes some notes about Itachi and his superiority to this Sasuke, which firstly already is corroborated through their comparisons throughout the summit, such as their comparisons in Genjutsu, which are a night and day difference between the Tsukiyomi and Sasuke's regular Genjutsu, despite the fact that whenever Sasuke does obtain EMS, he's able to equal out that Tsukiyomi, which is corroborated by the data book, which states that basically he's finally caught up to his brother. You know, he's finally caught up to this Edo Itachi, which is interesting as well. Many people don't like to scale Edo to alive. I've always been somebody to actually just put Edo to alive, and you guys can watch my Itachi video for more information on as to why I would do that, but I think it's at least comparable, and at least you have to kind of say that Edo Itachi is a version of a live Itachi, regardless of what point you take. Kabuto does not amplify his body and leaves crippled Nagato, who can't even walk, despite him knowing that the Rinnegan's a superior dojutsu to the Sharingan, or at least him thinking that. So he definitely isn't amplifying Itachi. He doesn't even know that Itachi doesn't have the sensory ability, and he thinks he does. So yeah, I would say that Itachi at some point in the Akatsuki could even be relative to this greater Sasuke, and that's just implied throughout the summit again through their comparisons of Itachi being superior, and again as that narrative I mentioned much earlier, with now the Kage Summit Sasuke and Sage Mode Naruto are approaching the tier and approaching that level of those characters. Obviously Naruto, that he beat Pain, but obviously that was not a very fair fight, and Pain basically did win that fight, and obviously Sasuke is now trying to reach the level of Itachi. So I definitely think that Itachi is a good benchmark for the other two as well, but he also just has really good ways. If he's already going to enter in at a superior footing to Sasuke, he's got good ways to deal with him as well, such as a much more superior Susanoo and things like the spiritual weapons, the Totsuka blade and the Yadamir, you know, plunge anything into a world of drunken dreams and match the attributes of any oncoming attack to repel anything, whether ninjutsu or anything, whether from a material or astral body, ninjutsu or physical, they all lose their meaning even in the face of a god's power, according to the third data book. So obviously there's tons of glades for these things, and they obviously don't get kind of debunked at all, and they seem to fit. So obviously anything that Sasuke has, at least by this point, Itachi basically has better. Itachi is stated to have power beyond the Mangekyou, so he's kind of maxed out the Mangekyou, which Sasuke only ever does once he gets the full V4 complete Susanoo against Kakashi, and things like that. So I'd say that Itachi comes in narratively and power scaling wise superior to this Sasuke, and offers a good benchmark that both Pain and Obito would also be above. Do you want to touch about maybe some of their abilities and how they'd interact and why they'd also just win as well?
Yeah, so I think the thing people need to understand with, well, I guess I'll start with Obito, but I mean, he's pretty self-explanatory. A feat I see people use against Obito is when he's attempting to go save Sasuke and you see him invoke his like travel, him traveling into the Kamui space in order to appear at a different point on Earth. Now, the problem with this feat, and he does this when Danzo was about to slash Sasuke and kind of cut off his neck. The problem with this feat is that even if you granted it to Sasuke, it doesn't really matter since this is the slowest of Obito's speeds. He's faster when he actually slips through and when he pulls somebody into the Kamui space. Him teleporting himself is noted to be the slowest. So this doesn't really matter since Obito would never use it in a combat setting. He would just slip to the ground and reappear somewhere else. So I think his win conditions are very simple. He just slips through Sasuke's attack. The second fan book notes that Kamui is pretty much is able to negate or phase through all offensive ninjutsu, or taijutsu. So nothing Sasuke has is really just going to be able to just hit Obito through Kamui. And I don't really see a reason Obito can't just run at Sasuke through the Susanoo and just grab him. And once he does grab him, just initiate the Kamui, especially since someone of Minato's caliber isn't really able to physically break out of Obito's grip on more than one occasion, to the point he needs FTG to avoid Obito's raw strength. So, again, I do have Minato over Obito, but I am more so noting I think Obito may be physically stronger, at least in his ability to swing his arm or grip somebody, which is really all you need to say for him getting the Kamui GG.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything you said there. Even as the Minato guy, I guess I'll give the authority there as well. But no, I think that was a good video. I think this was good. Thank you for coming on. I thought it was quite good. Make sure all of you guys do go over to his channel and subscribe. He's got a lot of good content you guys could definitely learn from and find some enjoyment in. So I definitely encourage you to do that. His channel will be linked in either the pinned comment or the description, depending on how late I forget to add it. So yeah, I mean, if you guys did enjoy, then please consider subscribing by all means. Maybe check out some more of my content, but more importantly than that, God bless you all. Love you guys.